It began with a phone call that shattered everything. One of her closest friends called her in a hushed voice, hesitant, almost guilty, and said, "I need to ask you, is it true what people are saying about you?" Her heart sank instantly. "What do you mean?" she asked, but the answer already pulsed in her chest like a drum. The friend hesitated, then whispered the words that would ignite the fire in her. "Your ex is telling everyone you cheated, that you used him, that you were unstable." For a moment, the world tilted. She could barely breathe. She had ended that relationship quietly, carefully, because she thought walking away with dignity was better than dragging it out. They had problems, yes. He was controlling, manipulative, always twisting arguments, so she felt like the villain. But she never thought he would go this far. By the next day, the rumors were everywhere. Her coworkers avoided her, their eyes darting when she entered the break room. Friends who once called daily now sent short, awkward texts or stopped responding altogether. Even family gatherings grew cold, with relatives asking subtle questions that carried the weight of doubt. It was like a stain spreading through every corner of her life, and no matter how loudly she tried to defend herself, the lies traveled faster. And the worst part? He looked like the victim. He painted himself as the poor, heartbroken man betrayed by someone he loved. He told stories about sleepless nights, about betrayal so cruel it nearly broke him. People ate it up. Sympathy poured in for him, while suspicion stuck to her like tar. She had never felt so powerless. Imagine waking up every day knowing her name was being dragged through conversations, knowing the person who once claimed to love her was now using their history as a weapon. Imagine holding her phone, staring at messages that used to bring joy, now filled with silence. For weeks, she cried. She replayed their relationship in her head, wondering if there had been signs, if she should have seen this coming. But then, slowly, the sadness hardened into something sharper. Rage. Because the more she thought about it, the more she realized this was not just heartbreak. This was calculated. Her ex did not just want her gone. He wanted her ruined. He wanted to strip away her support, her credibility, her future, and he thought she would just take it. But he underestimated her. The first crack in his plan came when she stumbled across something online, a post about his new job. He had landed a position at a company in the very industry she had been grinding her way into for years. He was celebrating, posting photos of himself in his new office, writing captions about fresh starts and big opportunities. And that was when the thought hit her, so sharp it made her breath catch. If he wanted to play with her reputation, she would play with his career. Because while he had spread lies about her in whispers and shadows, she had the ability to build something louder, stronger, and far more permanent. He had taken her peace. She was going to take his future. She did not know exactly how yet, but she made herself a vow that night. She would not just survive his lies. She would rise so high above them that one day, he would have to look up and realize the cruelest twist of all. His career, his dream, his very livelihood would depend on her. And that thought became her fuel. Once the vow was made, she started looking at him differently. She stopped seeing him as the man who broke her heart and started seeing him as a puzzle to be solved. Every liar has cracks in their armor. Every manipulator has patterns they repeat, and she was determined to find his. She watched his social media with the precision of a detective. Every post, every brag, every interaction told her something. He loved attention. He fed on validation. The sympathy he gained from spreading lies about her was not just revenge, it was his lifeline. He needed to be admired, pitied, or praised at all times. And most of all, he needed to look like he was winning. But she also noticed something else. He was careless. He exaggerated stories until they contradicted each other. He bragged about achievements that did not line up with reality. And the deeper she looked, the more she realized his entire identity was built like a house of cards. She began planting the first seeds quietly. A comment here, a subtle correction there. If he bragged about late nights at work, she would casually point out that his company's office had closed hours earlier. If he boasted about being promoted, she would ask a harmless-sounding question that exposed the lie in front of others. Nothing too direct, nothing that would give away her intentions. Just small, strategic nudges to make people start doubting him the way they had once doubted her. At the same time, she focused on herself. Instead of chasing after friends who believed his lies, she poured her energy into building her own reputation back from scratch. She worked longer hours, volunteered for projects, made herself impossible to ignore at work. If he had painted her as unstable and unreliable, she was going to prove the opposite. Every accomplishment was a brick in the wall of credibility she was constructing. And slowly it worked. Her bosses noticed. Coworkers who had once given her side eyes started coming to her for advice. She was invited into rooms he could only dream of stepping into. The higher she climbed, the smaller his lies became. But this was not just about proving herself. It was about power. Real, undeniable power. Because the industry they were both in was small. Careers overlapped. Paths crossed. And she knew that if she kept climbing, eventually she would reach a point where her voice carried weight. Weight that could make or break someone's career. And when that day came, she would be ready. She still remembered the first time it hit her that she was getting close. She was at a networking event, shaking hands with executives, when she overheard someone mention his name. Her ex. They were discussing his work, his new position. One man frowned and said, "I have heard mixed things about him. Something about overpromising and underdelivering." She did not say a word. She just smiled, sipped her drink, and let the conversation carry on. But inside, she felt a spark ignite. The seeds were sprouting. His lies had carried him this far, but his habits, his recklessness, were catching up. And she was quietly standing right where she needed to be. Close enough to watch, far enough to plan. Because revenge, she was learning, was not about shouting in the moment. It was about patience. About waiting until the exact right time to flip the script. And the time was coming faster than she could have imagined. It was almost poetic the way it happened. Months of silence, of living separate lives. And then suddenly, their worlds collided in a way neither of them could ignore. She had been steadily climbing in her career, taking on bigger projects, meeting people who mattered, building influence. Then one day, her boss called her into her office with a smile. "We're partnering with another firm," she said. "You'll be the point of contact. The client lead is someone named." She glanced at her notes, and when the name rolled off her tongue, her heart froze. It was him, her ex. For a split second, she felt the old wound throb. The memories of lies, the whispers, the humiliation he caused. But then, something else washed over her. Calm, steady, almost cold. This was not a coincidence. This was an opportunity. The first meeting was tense, at least for him. He walked into the conference room with his usual cocky smile. But the moment his eyes landed on her, it faltered. His face drained for just a second before he forced the grin back into place. She could see the panic flicker behind his eyes. He had not expected to see her here, not in this position, not across the table with equal, maybe even greater, authority. She shook his hand politely, her expression unreadable. "Nice to see you again," she said evenly. From that moment on, she had the upper hand, and he knew it. She did not need to sabotage him outright. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she became precise, strategic. She let him talk in meetings, let him overpromise as he always did. And then, calmly, she would point out the flaws in his proposals, asking the kinds of questions that revealed how little he had prepared. She was not attacking, she was exposing. The more he tried to impress, the more cracks appeared. Behind the scenes, she played it even smarter. She built strong relationships with the senior executives on both sides. She delivered results quickly, flawlessly, so every time his mistakes showed, the contrast was sharper. Colleagues began turning to her for decisions instead of him. His influence shrank, hers grew, and all she had to do was let him trip over his own lies while she stayed steady. It was not long before whispers started. The same kind of whispers that had once haunted her, but now they surrounded him. People muttered about his lack of follow-through, his inflated ego, his inability to deliver. And just like that, the roles had reversed. But the true turning point came during a high-stakes presentation to secure a massive client. He was supposed to lead. He strutted into the boardroom, slides ready, words rehearsed. But halfway through, the client interrupted with a tough question. She watched his confidence crack like glass. He stumbled, repeated himself, offered an answer so vague it was almost laughable. Silence filled the room, heavy and damning. That was when she stepped in. Smoothly, without hesitation, she addressed the client directly, gave a clear solution, and laid out a concrete plan. The room shifted instantly. Heads nodded. Pens scribbled notes. The client smiled. By the end of the meeting, the contract was theirs, and everyone knew it was because of her, not him. Afterward, he cornered her in the hallway, his voice low and tight. "You're trying to make me look bad." She met his glare with calm eyes. "No," she said softly. "You're doing that all by yourself." For the first time, he had no comeback. He just stood there, his face flushed, his jaw clenched, the reality settling in. The career he had built on lies was now tangled in her hands. And she was not finished yet. Because this was more than just revenge. This was the moment she realized she did not just want to watch him fall. She wanted to control the very ground he was standing on. After that presentation, the shift was undeniable. On paper, he still held his title, but in practice, everyone looked to her. When decisions needed clarity, they asked for her input. When deadlines approached, they relied on her leadership. And when his name came up in conversations behind closed doors, it was followed by sighs, doubts, and questions about whether he was really cut out for the role. She did not have to smear him. She did not have to spread lies. She only had to do the one thing he had never been capable of: deliver results. Each time she succeeded, it cast his failures in sharper relief. But she did more than just outperform him. Quietly, carefully, she began to influence who had access to him. When clients requested updates, she offered to handle them directly. When executives needed progress reports, she volunteered to prepare them. Little by little, his role shrank. His authority became ceremonial, a shadow of what it once was. He could feel it slipping away, and the more desperate he became to prove himself, the more reckless his mistakes grew. It reached a breaking point one Friday afternoon. He had promised a client a deliverable that was not even close to ready. When the deadline hit and nothing appeared, the client erupted. Emails flew. Calls escalated. The client threatened to walk. And in that storm of chaos, she stepped in. She apologized, took ownership of the failure, then calmly explained the solution she had already put in motion. Within 24 hours, the problem was fixed, the client appeased, and the executives reassured. The fallout landed squarely on his shoulders. He was called into a meeting with upper management, and though the details were never shared openly, the look on his face when he walked out said everything. He had been warned. Officially, his career was hanging by a thread, and there she was, holding the scissors. But the most poetic twist came months later, when the firm announced it was restructuring. A new leadership role was being created, a director position overseeing projects across both companies. A position that would report directly to the executives. A position that would decide who got opportunities and who did not. She applied, of course. So did he. They both knew what was at stake. For him, it was survival. For her, it was victory. The interview process was grueling, but she walked in with a portfolio of results that spoke louder than any speech could. He, on the other hand, walked in with excuses. She heard whispers afterward, how he stumbled over questions, how he tried to take credit for work everyone knew was hers. When the announcement finally came, her name was on the email. Director. The role was hers. And just like that, the circle was complete. The man who had once spread lies to ruin her now had his career tethered directly to her decisions. Every project he touched, every opportunity he wanted, every step he hoped to take in the future, all of it passed through her. His reputation, once bolstered by fabrications, was now balanced on her approval. He knew it too. She saw it in his eyes the first time he sat across from her after the promotion. Gone was the smug grin, the mocking confidence. In its place was something rawer. Fear, resentment, the bitter taste of powerlessness. She did not need to humiliate him. She did not need to say a word about the lies he once told. The silence was enough. The reality was enough. He had tried to bury her with whispers, but she had risen high enough that his future was hers to shape. And every time she signed off on his work, every time he had to swallow his pride and defer to her, he remembered the truth. He had spread lies about her. And now, she controlled his career. So the lesson was clear. When someone tries to destroy your name, will you let them define you, or will you rise so high above them that they end up working under the very shadow they created?